The legacy of the National Security Act of 1947 that established the national security state had the obvious consequences of the overthrow of dozens of legitimately elected foreign governments during the Cold War. The unintended consequences of blowback has led to a more hostile environment to U.S. national interest in the 21st century, but it has led to other less obvious consequences to the American Republic itself. The power of the U.S. intelligence agencies to overthrow foreign governments at will has also impacted the domestic American political landscape. The ability to destabilize the world almost at will has conferred the same ability to these agencies in American politics. For men with this kind of power, the temptation to play God on the American landscape and to control the future direction and fate of the United States has been irresistible. COINTELPRO counterintelligence program operations, historically and presently, are aimed at individuals involved in progressive political movements taking part in constitutionally protected riots that seek to change society and evolve the republic as Thomas Jefferson had intended. The first large-scale psychological warfare operation aimed at the domestic political environment was the McCarthy-era Red Scare that purged the progressive members of the media and politics. These individuals were viewed as hostile agents and threats to the security of the United States by members of the intelligence community, even though they were not foreign-directed movements or foreign-directed personalities, and were in fact members of the loyal opposition who sought to change and evolve American society by peaceful means. Senator Joseph McCarthy and his hangers-on rode the climate of fear to greater control of the media and consolidation of political power. Thousands of loyal Americans were ruined financially, emotionally, and destroyed physically. The purge operation consolidated power in the hands of right-wing reactionary elements of society and enshrined a worldview that solidified the Cold War, turned the world into a battleground between good and evil, and enriched the military-industrial complex. The cost of building tens of thousands of nuclear weapons and an awesome war machine absorbed much of the wealth of the nation for decades, but did not confer greater security to the population, and in fact had the opposite effect. Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong were men to be feared, but they were mostly preoccupied with controlling their own populations and securing greater hegemony over the territory they already controlled. And as time went on, these regimes became more and more defensive in nature, not necessarily due to the doctrine of containment elucidated by President Harry Truman. In short, much of the Cold War was an unnecessary exercise that was driven by myopia and paranoia and the desire to secure larger budgets and exert greater control over American society. The view of a monolithic communism, and specifically the domino theory, were self-fulfilling prophecies that did not materialize, no matter how hard the U.S. political and military establishment tried. General Douglas MacArthur was the first military personality to attempt to subvert the Constitution in an overt manner in his drive to engage China in an all-out war and to destroy the Communist Revolution with nuclear weapons, while the U.S. still held a virtual monopoly in these weapons of mass destruction. General MacArthur's view on communism and the need to destroy it head-on were shared by many in the intelligence community and the military. These thwarted drives emerged in the McCarthy psychological warfare operation and in other destabilization operations aimed at the American people. These PSYOPs, or destabilization campaigns, are personified in Operation Northwoods. The Joint Chiefs of Staff was the source of the plan known as Operation Northwoods. General Lemnitzer was considered a master planner. He was upset with the Kennedy administration's stance toward communism in general, and Cuba in particular. In the name of anti-communism, they proposed launching a secret and bloody war of terrorism against their own country in order to trick the American public into supporting an ill-conceived war they intended to launch against Cuba. The plan, which was written with the approval of every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, called for innocent people to be shot down on American streets in a sniper campaign, for people to be framed for bombings they did not commit, and for civilian airliners to be hijacked, and much more. Lemnitzer and the other Joint Chiefs of Staff knew that there was only one option left that would ensure their war. They would have to trick the American public and world opinion into hating Cuba so much that they would not only go along with, but would insist that he, Lemnitzer, and his generals, the Joint Chiefs, launch their war against Castro. Quote, "World opinion and the United Nations Forum," said a secret Joint Chiefs of Staff document, "should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash, irresponsible, and as an alarming and unpredictable threat to the peace of the Western Hemisphere." Unquote. This was one of the most corrupt plans ever created by the U.S. government. General Lemnitzer and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were heavily politicized, joining far-right political organizations and holding political seminars on bases. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, in a report on the problem of right-wing extremism in the military, warned that there was, quote, "considerable danger in the education and propaganda activities of military personnel. Running through all of them is a central theme that the primary, if not exclusive, danger to this country is internal communist infiltration. The thesis of the nature of the communist threat often is developed by equating social legislation with socialism, and the latter with communism. Much of the Kennedy administration's domestic legislative programs, including graduated income tax, Social Security, federal aid to education, and others under this philosophy would be characterized as steps towards communism." Unquote. Finally, the committee specifically pointed to General Lemnitzer and called for an examination of the relationship between him, his chiefs, and the extreme right-wing groups. McNamara demoted Lemnitzer and transferred him to Europe as chief of NATO. Later, President Gerald Ford promoted the darling of the Republican right to the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, while his Cuba chief, General Craig, became chief of the NSA's military arm, the Army Security Agency.